Good evening, Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me on my show at Mindful Talk with Amber at Channel 52. I am very happy and delighted that you guys are joining me today. And today's we are starting a new series, and it's called "Break the Silence." It's a very important topic as whatever is going on today. But before we go on to more details of breaking the barriers and breaking the silence, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our beautiful panel and very important people here. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to start with Ali Al-Hajj, um, and he's a founder and a member of Passaic Valley of Community Justice, board member, Council of American Islamic Relationship in New Jersey chapter. And he is a recent graduate at Seton Hall University School of Diplomacy and International Relationships. And he's also a very young activist, and I myself have witnessed him doing a great job in many different platforms. So thank you, Ali, for joining us.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. You actually represent youth, and it's such an important thing for youth to be introduced, in this matter or any matter of life. So I really dearly appreciate you coming on the panel with us.
No, I'm happy to be here.
Okay. And the second person we have here is, a very dear friend as well, Mayor Mohamed Khairullah. And, I know him from many years and very obliged to have him. And actually, because we know each other for a long time, we don't know much about, the great work you have been doing. Reading your biodata, I was so impressed that, you have done so much work, in your life. So, coming from Syria in 1980, and then how you have been a former, firefighter, and that is in your nature. That shows in your character. You're a fighter all your life. And another thing is that, which makes you from 2005 the only Syrian Arab Muslim mayor in New Jersey is, that you've been serving your community for quite a while. That itself is a proof that how much people love you, and, you have been proving of your services. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Amber, and obviously all praise go due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the support system that I have. And as you mentioned, I know your family for a very long time, and you guys are hard workers yourself, and you're doing something that's very important for the community, and that is media. So God bless you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much. And as I'm not doing due justice to everybody's introduction, please feel free and fill me in, and please talk about yourself, because this program is about talking about ourselves. I think we have lost our next guest, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving on, and hopefully he would be able to join us back. Okay, so okay. I got nervous. I thought that I lost you.
I had a bad internet connection. Sorry about that.
So not a problem. If for some reason, if we lose each other, we will just keep, coming back again. And because of the rain today, it's happening, So even if I disappear, I'll log back in. Not a problem. We got this now.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So our third person here is Abdul-Alim, and thank you so much for joining us. I know you have yourself a beautiful bio. You have been on CNN. And you're with the communication expert, journalist, and an educator, and have such a beautiful bio that I would not do due justice explaining myself. So please go ahead and educate us about your history and
Well, primarily my background. Thank you for having me here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Primarily, my background is in broadcast journalism, and I was a broadcast journalism for over 30 years. And among those 30 years, I spent about half of that at CNN. And aside from that, I've also been a community activist and in my community where I live here in Maplewood, New Jersey. And I've lived here in Maplewood, New Jersey for nearly 40 years with my family. And so I raised my family here and everything. And so, I've been involved in a lot of the community activities in terms of interfaith relationships, dawah, and, teaching and doing workshops and things of that nature and mentoring and so forth. So that's been part of my background, yes.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. So today's topic, as we're talking about, Black Lives Matter. But before I go there, I really want to talk about the depth of, discrimination in whole. As we all are Muslims, alhamdulillah, on this panel, let's talk about something. Let's get uncomfortable and let's be okay talking about uncomfortable things. I know it's difficult, but we have to start from there. We have to start from accepting our shortcomings. And I will be the first one saying that there is discrimination even in my own culture. I have seen it as a kid growing up. I have seen it in my grandmother, my grandfather, and in different cultures, because I have been married and intermarried with different culture, and my parents were too, and had the ability to be grown in Middle East and growing up seeing that even in Islam we have seen, and other cultures, discrimination is everywhere. Discrimination does lie, and we cannot talk about Black Lives Matter unless we don't resolve our own underline under the rugs issues. So I do want to take a feedback from all of you here.
All right. So I agree with you. Let me start by saying I'm honored to be with you and with your other two guests, and I look forward to hearing from everyone. I came to the United States as an immigrant, and before we talk about the illnesses with the system, because there are illnesses in the system. Most of us came in as immigrants because of the system that the US has. So I had to flee Syria when I was not even 5 years old. Then I had to go from Saudi Arabia to the United States because I could not get higher education in a Muslim and Arab country as a non-Saudi. So there are these systematic biases that are in the Middle East. So the beautiful thing about the US is the systems, the Constitution, the laws. The flawed thing, and I know there are some parts of the system that were designed by people who were okay with slavery, people who were okay with putting others down. However, overall, there is a good system to work with. There's a system of courts. There's a system of institutions that we don't have in the Middle East. So we need to take the beautiful and enhance it and deal with the ugly and hopefully get rid of it. So that is the beginning. That's my opening statement when it comes to what we're going to discuss. There's no doubt, now that I have been in the United States for 29 years and my children were all born here, and they're not immigrants, they're born in the US, and unlike me, they could run for the presidency. And we established roots in the United States, that we are fully integrated in society, and we have to deal now with the illnesses because they affect us and they affect our children, and they will affect many generations to come. And the beauty here is you could always continue to work and enhance the system.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I 100% agree with you. And I know that two of you are Arabs here. Even among Arabs, Saudis have their own discrimination, and we always, growing up living there, we have felt it. Although I'm not an Arab, but it was very openly said, and kind of an understood kind of thing that um, and yeah, miskeen and ya Rafiq, there were certain wordings, associated with the foreigners. So, Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to bring up about the Middle East and how there's still embedded racism in our culture. I mean, this started all, racism has been a thing in the Middle East since the slave trade has started. Way before, they're even way before the beginning of Islam. So I think that's something that the Middle East needs to address, is that racism is not only just an American issue, it's also a Middle Eastern issue, because as you just said before, we do have some words that are derogatory uh, you know, towards Black Arabs. And it's our, if we're talking about how do we make the Middle East better, we also need to include that aspect of making sure that we're not being discriminatory against those Black Arabs. So like that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is going off of what Khairullah just said, which is about like our system of governments. Other countries, not other countries, I would say majority of the entire world looks up to the United States as sort of a guiding light of, how do we deal with the most complex issues? And where we are right now is a very peculiar place because, you have a president who's perpetuating, who's continuously perpetuating racism in this country, even though to some surprise that, racism is still existent in our country, whether it's systematic or whether it's in our culture. So I think that, we need to have these uncomfortable conversations about the embedded racism that is in our communities, that is also in our institutions, because otherwise we can't be telling other people to follow our way of governance when, you have when you have Germans, the French, the Japanese, who are basically saying that, they're in solidarity, the Black Lives Matter movement, which sort of goes against our way of governance, only because, of the institutionalized racism that exists in it.
Absolutely, absolutely right. So, Mr. Abdul-Alim, what
Yeah,
exactly do you have to say?
allow me this. Unlike most of you that are products, of to children of immigrants, uh, my people, that from which I stem, the culture or the race of people or the group of people which I extend from, are not products of that. We are products of a history of genocide and slavery. Part of my heritage is also Native American. Okay, maybe a lot of people maybe not be aware of that. But part of my heritage is Native American, and the other part of my native heritage is African. And my ancestors did not come here as immigrants. My ancestors came here on slave ships, put into chains and deprived of functioning in the vital areas of our lives. So we see the United States a little bit differently than what some of our immigrant brothers and sisters who are Muslim may see that. We had to fight and struggle for every bit of freedom that we have come to enjoy. And we built this country from the ground up with nothing in return. And so we shed blood for every war in this country, fought in every war in this country, and still were deprived of the basic fundamental rights that every human being should have. The founding fathers were slave owners. Let's be clear on that. The founding fathers was also, and those who, the subsequent presidents who succeeded them, many of them were guilty of genocide of the native indigenous peoples here. And so we see America in a whole different light than what some of our immigrant brothers and sisters do. And there's the racism and the systems of white supremacy as a systemic issue. It is not just a matter of disliking someone because of the color of their skin and so forth and so on. We were deprived of economic rights. We were deprived of our human rights. We were deprived of the rights to have a decent education, the rights to have a good job. And even when we had those communities that were historically successful, the jealousy and envy and racism and evil and wickedness of many of the whites burned the towns down. So we tend to have a very much more, how can you say this, nuanced view of American history and its potential. Now, granted, yes, we use the Constitution to force these changes and force the American government and American society to redress its grievances, our grievances. But even that was half-hearted, And here we are 50 years later, 60 years later, having the same arguments and discussions that we had when I was a young man over 50 years ago. So really very little if nothing has changed in the sense that here we are again having this exact same conversation. Now, my brothers and sisters in Islam who are, to be fair, arrived here rather in the latter part of the history of this nation. There were certain advantages that were afforded to them that were not afforded, that never have been afforded to us. Let's be clear. And I'm not saying that as a matter of jealousy or envy. I'm just stating as a matter of historical fact. And so, there were certain advantages that were already sort of embedded, if you will, that were afforded many of the immigrants who came here that were never, ever, ever afforded to us. And so, we are operating from a whole different particular platform of understanding, if you will. And so it's important that we have these kind of discussions just to share some historical context, if you will.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to take some questions here. We're having a lot of viewers here. People are saying, Assalamu alaikum. I agree with the discussion, good discussion. There's a question from Sarah, which is, how can we change society to stay away from using derogatory comments or derogatory terms in any language or culture?
I'll take this one first, because this is something that I've been having conversations even with my own friends within my own community.
Yes, and if you can have the question please on the screen so everybody can see it.
So, I think that's a great question, because that is a question that everyone's thinking about. All right, if these words are bad, then how can we tell other people that these words are bad and make sure that they understand the meaning? Well, that's the solution right there. We actually have to have these conversations, whether it is with our family, whether it is with our parents, whether it is with our friends, whether it is with our, our coworkers, about, the meanings behind these words. I mean, like the other day I was getting a haircut, and, someone in the barbershop, and it's an Arab barbershop. So someone in the barbershop, described black people for the Arabic word for slave. And right there, I stopped and I said, no, you cannot say that word, because that word has a very derogatory meaning. And I understand that, like, it's sort of used as a joke and everything, but these jokes, do come with consequences. So, we really have to have these conversations, and really, if we have to call people out on it, it's okay to call people out on it, as long as you're not being, I don't want to say aggressive with them, but you're showing them the right way, the right thinking of why these words are bad in the first place. So my final answer basically is, we have to make sure that we have these conversations about the meanings behind these words and why they're not okay, because essentially, they perpetuate the racism that is in existence in our community.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Mayor, I want to come to you.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to racism. Number one, the aspect of racism that is taught, and that happens inside the house. So when someone from a young age is taught by people in their household that someone else is inferior, that is one aspect of racism. But the other aspect is what society accepts, what we decide is okay. So, for example, if we go to Brother Abdul-Alim's example, until the 60s, or I'm not sure, and he probably could teach us a lot more about segregation, but segregation was acceptable in society. They abolished slavery in the late 1880s, but there was still segregation. The Supreme Court said that segregation was acceptable at one point. Mm-hmm. So what is acceptable by society? At one point, it was okay to harass Arabs and Muslims and others because we were the bad guys in the media. Now, alhamdulillah, I think in New Jersey we have a little more, we're more involved in the political process, but I'm not sure that we have the same type of protection in other states. So it's about what is acceptable by society. So I think the fact that the African American had the civil rights movement, and I have said this publicly, we owe them a huge debt of gratitude because they opened doors for us. And he is right, Brother Abdul-Halim is right. We've surpassed some of them in terms of where we are. They're more affluency within the Arab or Muslim community. And we owe a debt of gratitude to the African American community to go back into these communities and help lift those who need help.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We do owe, and actually, we are here because of them. We should not forget that. And I did not know, Brother Abdul-Alim, that your background is from Native American, because I was inviting another sister on this show, and she plainly said to me, she said, now because you want to talk on the show and it's the popular thing, that's why you're calling me to come. I am not coming because you're just using me, and I felt, and I apologize that the media and the society, the way it's looking like that. And she said, where were we before? We were never been asked, we were never been associated with anything, and till the government has given us a specific quota for education and specific grants. Before that, we were never there. This land was not even given to us. So the anger and everything, it's very, very valid. I completely understand.
Yeah, and to borrow a particular phrase from a very active community here in the Maplewood South Orange area, civic community, we need to have our own conversations on race amongst us. And you all need to have and when I say you, I mean, I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. Those of the immigrant community, amongst their own, amongst the Pakistanis, among the Arab-speaking peoples and what have you, needs to have their conversations amongst themselves. And we have to have the conversations together. Because, after all, bottom line, aside from everything else, those of us who claim the mantle of Islam, of al-Islam, okay? I say that in that context because not all Arabs are Muslims, all right? And so, but those of us who claim the mantle of al-Islam, all right, we have a special imperative to set the example, if you will, okay, for others to follow, all right? However, I'm fully aware of the sort of historical racism and bigotry that has existed in the Arab world for generations. And because I've been that part of the world myself, and I'm aware of it. And even within the context of Islam itself, there has been incidences of sort of, I could say, language that wasn't really complimentary toward people of African descent. So we need to start having these conversations on race, and modify that with respect to the conversations we have amongst ourselves, and be willing to stand in our own discomfort, because this is a very uncomfortable conversation for everybody, and we get that.
It is.
And so, but just as communities all around the country, and I'm speaking specifically of the community where I live, we are having these conversations and have had these conversations amongst the races, okay, for quite a few years now. And so it's important that we begin to have these conversations on race, all right, on a platform just like this, all right, because otherwise we could perhaps have them, and when the situations change and it's safer to be in public amongst ourselves. But short of that, we need to have these type of conversations continuously.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take an example. It just happened today, and I would ask the audience and everyone to excuse me because the word was used such. So I have to use the word on the screen. When somebody was talking about that, we can say things to each other because we are from the same background, you know, and it was specifically an African American brother saying to the other one that if a white person say to another one that, you know, he's a nigger, it's extremely offensive. But an African American one person can say to the other one that, hey, hi, how are you, and say the same word, it's not offensive. So the question it raised at that time, that it's a wrong derogatory, you know, language. It's wrong no matter who uses it.
Well, let me speak to that specifically.
Okay.
That is not, that idea or that notion isn't shared by all African Americans. Okay, we're not a monolith. Okay, there are many of us who detest that word, using it amongst ourselves. Okay, let alone seeing us using it against each other. You know, and there is a level of, you know, let's just face it, because of the historical, psycho-historical dynamics that racism, white supremacy, and colonialism has played throughout the world, you know, there has been a sense of self-loathing and inferiority, you know, amongst those of us who were subjected to that kind of dynamic. Okay, there in other parts of the world where the process of colonialism took place, it didn't just deal with the physical dynamics of the system, but also the psychological components of it and the cultural components of it, and what it imposed upon the people, you know, with respect to a sense of inferiority, that we cannot accomplish anything without the input of the European. And nobody understands that better than those of us who were here, who were in the very belly of this beast, and who knew that very well. So once as we understand that here, we can also project a certain understanding with respect to the impact of colonialism on the impact that it had on other parts of the world, as was exemplified through the time of when our brother Malcolm, you know, he began to address those issues from a standpoint not just civil rights but human rights. You know, so you know we understand that we understand the impact of colonialism on the mind of the people of who were subjected to that. We understand that because we ourselves are products of that to varying degrees.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a next question. The question is, can you explain why Black Lives Matter is a movement for everyone, and all lives matter is something that is taking away from the point of creating an equal space for everyone? So I'm going to take this from Mayor, first from you, and then Ali, you, and then we go back to...
Well, the simple answer, Amber, is all lives do not matter until Black lives matter. The fact is the system of racism in the United States is on display worldwide after the George Floyd incident. We've known now, we know that there's racism. The world, everyone looks at the United States as this beacon of democracy and freedom, and everybody is happy and giddy, but our racism is on display worldwide. So all lives will not matter until Black lives matter. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he who kills one man as if he killed the entire mankind. So you know, to answer the question, it is an important movement, and people who use all lives matter, they need to check their internal self-racism that might be hidden intentionally, or they might not be aware of it, and they need to self-review, because you can't say all lives matter until you make sure that the lives of those who are always systematically oppressed matter. Look, I have my own issues of discrimination whenever I go into an airport, but I have to walk into an airport to feel that discrimination. An African American person feels that discrimination every single day, every single hour. They're out there in public. So again, people need to self-review before they say all lives matter, because they need to make sure that Black lives matter first.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining it and making it very significantly clarified. Thank you so much. Ali, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off the mayor's point, I mean, he really brought up a good example, which is that, if you look at the way, if you put into context of how, Black Americans have been going through this country, have been treated in this country, they've always been treated, inferior to white people. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. I think everyone agrees that all lives matter, but as the mayor just said, all lives can't matter until all Black lives matter. So, and I think, like, you know, if anyone's still questioning of like, well, all lives should matter. So, like, we can't just say Black lives matter. Well, the question is, would you rather be a white American, or would you rather be a Black American? And I'm not just saying as like a choice of preference, but, the choice of like your ability to like, move up in society. Because it's very clear, if you're a white American, you're able to move up much quicker than, a Black American. So, I'd say to those people who say, all lives matter. Well, if all lives do matter, if you woke up as a Black American tomorrow, do you think your experience would be the exact same? So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Brother Abdul-Alim here.
Well, whenever I hear somebody say all lives matter, that's just a dismissive. They're
Yes.
being very dismissive. Okay. And it's a racist, it's a dismissiveness based upon one racist arrogance that one has. Okay. If all lives matter, then Black lives will surely matter. And again, listen, I'm old enough to remember this kind of conversations we had back in the 60s. So with white people, okay? And so the conversations we're having now is nothing new. It had to take all of these tragedies at once to get people's attentions all over again. But these are old conversations that we've had. And so I'm more concerned right now with substance, tangibles. We've been through generations of slogans. Okay, and yes, Black lives do matter. Okay, but beyond that, how do we actualize, if you will? How do we actualize the idea that the reality that Black lives matter? How do we actualize that? How do we actualize that in restructuring the economic systems in this country? How do we recognize that in restructuring the social conditions in this country? How do we actualize that as Muslims? Since we're talking amongst ourselves, how do we actualize that as Muslims amongst each other?
Okay.
So those are the conversations that we need to have.
Yes, these are absolutely right. These are the questions that we need to ask from each other. And what would be the right answer to it?
It's multifaceted. It's a multifaceted answer. I mean, we can sit here between the four of us and have a whole host of great ideas and conversations. So it can take so many different forms. It can be. I had a situation. I will never forget this. I was in 2001. I happened to be at a Muslim leadership training conference in Houston, Texas, sponsored by an nationally known immigrant Muslim group, and I was invited there. And I had a chance to talk to some young students, just like you guys. And one was asking, just one young brother, he happened to be a med student, and he was asking like the same question: what can we as Muslims, what can we do to assist our brothers and sisters in the inner cities? And I just said, for an example, I said, like, what profession are you in? He said, well, I'm a med student. He said, I'm graduating med school. He says, I'm getting my residency within the next few months, inshallah. I said, great. I said, look, when you get yourself in a position, go and open up a clinic, in the inner cities. This was in August 2001. Enter September 11th.
Okay.
And the whole paradigm shift changed. It was a whole paradigm shift, and I'm going to be very direct here in a sense, that those immigrant Muslims who had long dismissed us, has long looked past us, they began to seek us out and find and ask us, what should we do? Because we've been through this kind of discrimination before. And they had no clue of it. And so, that was that. It took something of that kind of national or international tragedy on such a grand scale to wake up the sleeping giants in this country to like, oh wow, we have a serious problem. And so here we are. And Allah works as He so pleases, and He brings about certain things to get our attention.
You're
So here we are.
You're absolutely right. When you are in trouble, then you call people who are similar in that situation. That's just a human nature. I'm going to
Precisely.
go ahead and go and take some comments here. We got a lot of questions here. Someone is saying, is there such thing as hate speech, or is all speech free speech? I guess it depends how you take it. And I'm going to go ahead. Ali, you can start as you're the youngest one.
Yeah, I mean, that type of question is pretty simple to me, and it's simple because there free speech is a thing in this country, but there is such thing as hate speech in this country, and this because if any sort of speech perpetuates an idea of discrimination against another person, then yes, that is hate speech, because as Americans, if we all really do really view ourselves as equal to everyone else, we wouldn't be trying to push each other's down based on things that we were born with, whether it's your skin color, whether it is your religion, or anything else like that. So I'm going to keep it blunt and just say yes, hate speech is a thing in this country, but you can't just mask hate speech with free speech.
Exactly. And I think that we don't need to discuss much about this question, because it's just like a glass can be half full or, half empty. So next question I'm going to go ahead and take. It's how can we control the media, which at times only show more negative news, more hatred news? I know it's important for people to know what is going on, but hate only promotes hate more, in my opinion. That is from Amir Hamza. That is true. Media does control, but at the same time, it is important to talk about what's going on. So, Mayor, go ahead.
So, obviously, we all know that corporate media is controlled by ideologies. You have Fox News, and then you have CNN, and each have a leaning. I think those are part of the problem that we have in the United States and around the world, controlled media. So just to be very direct, I think we need to start driving away from such media and looking for honest sources of news. There's obviously social media now has opened the door for many of us to seek sources of news that could be more accurate and more honest in terms of reporting the news without a spin or a twist. I could give you a big example. In the Middle East, there's two major news agencies. There's Aljarrah, which leans with Qatar and its allies, and there's Al Arabiya, which leans with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Emirates, and their allies. And they could take the same piece of news and then twist the bad guy into an evil guy, into a good guy, and the good guy into a bad guy, and vice versa. So we need to start pushing away from major media and start looking for more honest sources of news. That's as honest of an answer as I could give you, because they are part of the problem. The fact that they continue to give us negative news in a world full of negativism, rather than trying to turn things around in a positive direction, that's part of the problem that we're having. My device is about to die. I'm going to switch devices, so I'll join you guys soon.
Okay, thank you.
As a journalist myself, I can tell you that we have several platforms that exist now that did not exist years ago. And so we need to take advantage of those platforms, build upon those platforms, and develop our own alternative news sources. I spent over 30 years in broadcast journalism, and primarily in New York. And I can tell you without equivocation that, I've had the same conversation with many peoples over the years about, they're concerned that, that certain peoples and groups are not getting the media representation or the story that they feel that they should have, and that the media is very distorted and propaganda driven and economically driven, and that on a whole host of levels. So we have media platforms and social media and what have you, and that we are developing and have developed, in this country over the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years. So we should take advantage of that and improve on that and build on that. So to tell our own stories. The mayor, Brother Mohamed, was talking about Al Jazeera. I mean, I recall when Al Jazeera was trying to set up a bureau in New York and was using our bureau in Midtown Manhattan to broadcast their news stories. And so I was at that time, we in New York, were very, we Muslims in New York, rather, were very pleased that at least you have now an outlet, that can tell the story from their perspective. And so I wasn't aware of the politics of Al Jazeera with respect to who owned what and this, that, and the other, and so forth. But the fact that, we were able to see stories coming out from that part of the world told by their own people and their own stories, that was a huge deal. And I recall very clearly that the company that owned CNN at the time, Time Warner, worked very, very hard to keep Al Jazeera out of the New York market. And that's a fact. And so, they recognize the power of other news sources. And so that being said, we should continue to develop our own news information sources and utilize those and build upon that. Yes.
Yes, like not all news is fake news.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take the next question. It is, what can people from different races and religions do to help each other in the United States?
Can I take this question? Because I have some thoughts on that. So I think that there's just sort of this perception that different religions and different ethnicities in the United States are not working together to combat racism. And that's a narrative that I don't like, simply for the fact that it's not true. I'm speaking from a place where I'm speaking from my location in the United States, which is like the Northeast. And typically, people in the Northeast is very diverse. So, if you look at this, look at the show today, we have, it's very diverse with people from different backgrounds. So it's not that, there's different ethnicities and different religious groups that are not working together. They're working together. It's just a matter of, people who should be listening, people who do hold these prejudices against, people with, different backgrounds. Those are the people that we really need to try to reach out to. And it's those people who are staying silent during these times that are allowing the perpetuation of these prejudices against, people from different backgrounds. So it's not that different religious groups and, and different ethnicities need to do more. It's the fact that we need to collectively, as a monolith, encourage those who are being silent right now about these issues to actually speak up, just to show that, in the United States, racism is not okay. Being discriminatory is not okay. So, it's not that. So, like I said before, it's not that different religious groups or different, ethnicities need to, do more, because they are doing a lot right now. There's last week I went through one interfaith dialogue, and then I went to a march that was filled up with people from different backgrounds. So I think we really need to, instead of focusing on how do we get different groups of people together, because they are together, about how do we get to those who are being silent on those issues.
Yeah, I actually can testify that, Ali, because I know you recently did a march, and you were in the management team. It was really done very nicely. And I have to say, because I have attended some other ones with my kids, that you guys kept it very peaceful. There were police around, and we were working with the police, and then you guys were giving masks and water and kept very hydrated. Beside that, when we went to do the speeches, and I remember there was an incident that, there was this one white guy wanted to come, and he said, I'm here to support, and his poster was there, and he really wanted to talk. I really appreciated this, that you guys did not change. You were very clear that no, this platform is for Black Lives Matter. I know people say that all lives matter, but no, today Black Lives Matter, and because of Black lives, other lives are mattering. And I'm not gonna give that platform to anybody else. And we didn't get the time to talk, but it was that's small things matters, and that's how it makes clarification to everyone.
Yeah,
So
and it's, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no.
No, but I did want to say, like, during that incident, the reason why, another reason why we didn't want him to speak is because that platform is specifically for, for the Black community.
Yeah.
And in this country, people love to just talk about these issues as if, they're the ones who are going to be, like, their voice is going to solve racism. That's not the way we're going to solve racism.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, conversations and talking to people in our community will help us mitigate and hopefully help us eradicate racism. But it's actually listening to those who are actually being oppressed in this country. That is the way we're going to actually, get through this, mess. And that's the reason why we sort of didn't want him to talk, because, like, white people in this country, not just white people, but other ethnicities who aren't being discriminated against in this country, they're the ones who already do have a platform, right? And I could have easily spoken at the event as well, but that was not my place. My place was to elevate those voices that are not heard. So I think, like, we have a moral obligation to make sure that we elevate those voices that are not being heard in the country.
Absolutely. I'm going to take another question. This is from Mr. Sultan Chaudhry, which is actually my brother-in-law. This is a great topic. Agree with Brother Abdul-Alim. We need to recognize among ourselves, people, especially the new immigrants, need to be aware of the significant struggle that our African American brothers and sisters had to endure to establish the civil rights in our country. So, okay, that was a comment. Another comment is from Faryal Meher. It is systematic racism. Changing need to happen from leadership all the way down to an individual, which is absolutely right. And that's another huge thing which we are facing.
As a conversation you and I had earlier, Amber, with respect
Yes.
to that, I want to share that part of that conversation with you, with the broader audience now. I think that the younger generation, Generation Z, Generation Y, Generation Z, the millennials, if you will, I think that your generation, Brother Ali, has the greatest potential to make the greatest impact, upon the society and the change. And I say that out of the fact that, I was at one time your age, and our generation were the movers and pushers and urgers and shakers, of our generation in the 60s and early 70s. And because your grandparents, your parents and your grandparents and great grandparents who came here, they had their own particular agendas with respect to trying to settle in this country, establish themselves in this country, to earn a living, to send their kids to school, to build their communities and what have you. And so their energies were focused in a whole different kind of area. You, on the other hand, and so doing that, naturally, when you come into a new place that you've never been before, and you come as a group, it's natural. It's very natural to sort of congregate amongst your own. That's just natural. Okay, that's a natural dynamic, in any society, right? However, what happens is that sometimes is that one is not aware of the things that are going on in the broader society to the extent that one feels impacted by it. Now, when you have children, okay, and your children go to the public schools, you engage in other peoples and what have you. You engage their friends in public schools. Their friends maybe are just from the broader society, wherever they may live, and they're impacted by that. They go to the colleges and they become impacted by the people they meet there, what have you. Naturally, their worldview is broadened and they'll understand something about the world that perhaps their parents or grandparents didn't know about. So here we have a situation where that, Ali's generation is really, sort of becoming awoken, okay? And I hate using that term all the time because it becomes such a throwaway word. But for the sake of anything, for lack of anything else, they becoming aware, okay, about the realities of racism, bigotry, white supremacy in the society, and they want to see a change because they're sick and tired of it. Because at some point in time, you guys are going to have kids, and I would think that you want, your children to grow up in a better world than your parents and grandparents did. And we all think, and that's what we all see. So I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope for the young generation coming out of here, coming forth in this day and time. I have a lot of hope for that. I haven't seen this kind of energy coming out since I was their age, back in the 60s and 70s. So it's a beautiful thing.
I absolutely agree with that. And I was having a conversation with my father, and my father did serve in Navy in Pakistan Navy, but he was from Bangladesh. And then they agreed to live in Saudi Arabia because of the way both countries divided. They knew that neither they can live in Pakistan peacefully, neither in Bangladesh. So it's better to have a family in Saudi. And my dad always tells me that it's easier for the next generation to make changes because you guys don't have those packages, from the back, the history. You guys can talk because you don't have psychological packages with you, which is absolutely true and right. And that's the reason of me having this conversation. It is difficult. Maybe it's easier for me to talk, but for my father and my mom's generation, it is hard to talk about that. Yes, we are discriminative. We don't want to intermarry African Americans, because we don't want to have kids who are not as attractive. That's what our grandmothers used to say, and I am, saying that in front of the TV. But I have to say that my family, my in-laws, one of my brother, he is married to a African American, and I think the question previously you asked, how can we get involved? I think once you start intermarrying, that's how you're accepting. That is your way of showing that, what, now you're family and I am accepting you. That is the best way to accept and completely take a person, in your under your wing.
Each of us have various gifts to offer into the society as a whole. Each of us comes to the society with various different worldview perspectives, and we can share those perspectives. Think of it as the market of ideas, okay? And we go into a marketplace to sell our wares, all right? And we often, when we go into the marketplace, we come with our best goods, our best excellence of goods. And we come into the marketplace of ideas and conversations and relationships. And we bring those goods to the marketplace and we exchange between each other. And we walk away at the end of the day more enlightened, more enriched, and everybody benefits from it. Yeah. That's the ideal that I've always seen. Okay, with respect to that. Remaining, and you can have you can still maintain the excellence of your own culture, and that's fine. That is fine. That's the whole concept of the Islamic concept of lita arafu, knowing one another, getting to know one another. It's deeper than that, but let me just, for the sake of brevity, just getting to understand everyone's nuances and recognize that we all have various gifts to bring to the whole society as a whole. And America could see a whole resurgence and a whole moral resurgence, and let be the example that their founding fathers had an ideal for, but didn't have the moral wherewithal to implement it. And nothing came in this country of good except by force.
In any country, I think, people have to fight I know we are coming very close to the end of our show, and I really want to thank each and every one of you. I do want to ask your last messages and comments. So, please go ahead and give me your last messages and comments. And I know that, I really appreciate your time. It is a difficult and, critical topic to get uncomfortable, and that's how we have to start the conversation. So, Mayor, I'm going to go ahead and get started with you, your final comments and messages to our audience.
Thank you very much, Amber, again, and thank you for inviting us to be on your show. I'm going to start with the same kind of statement that I started my opening statement with. Is we come here as immigrants with this beautiful image of the United States, and I am extremely thankful for all the opportunities that were offered to me and for the success that I've had, and the safety of my family in this land. I am extremely thankful for it. But I think as we become more and more integrated, we become familiar with its flaws, and one of the flaws is the racism, whether it's systematic or learned. So the one thing I could tell people is we need to improve our union as our forefathers wanted, to continually enhance in our union. And we enhance our union as a country by eradicating racism. And the two things that we could do immediately is, number one, make sure that our communities are counted by making sure that we fill out the census, because it brings more resources to our communities. And then number two, until November 3rd, make sure that everyone is registered. We need to make sure that the racist in chief is voted out of office. That is the most important thing that we need to do between now and November 3rd. This person single-handedly emboldened racists and bigots in the United States to a degree never seen before in my 3 decades in the United States. So I urge everybody to make sure you're registered to vote, and that you do vote. Make sure we vote that person out of office, because that would be part of our movement to get rid of racism in the United States.
Thank you, Mayor. Ali, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to speak on the perspective of being the youngest one here, but also, the generation that is coming into power right now. And the way, I'm seeing things and, talking to, people, who are my age, it really seems, not really seems, but yeah, I guess you could say it really seems, but it really seems that like my generation is going to be that generation. I wouldn't say to eradicate racism, but will be on the second to final step to actually eradicating racism in this country if we continue on this trend of just, putting the facts out there, telling people exactly why it's wrong to be discriminatory, why, certain words are wrong. Because we're going to realize, like, we need to unite as a country if we want the country to survive, because that is the fact of the matter. We can't be, we can't say that we're nationalistic if our nationalism is, embedded with racism. I wouldn't be surprised within the, in the next few years, we're going to see a new wave of nationalism, but a nationalism that is built off unity, nationalism that is built on, equality and equity. One that is built with, one that is built with an understanding of this country's history, and understanding that this system may not be perfect, but as President Barack Obama once said, it could be a much more perfect union if we want it to be, if we work towards that goal. So I'm hopeful, but that can't happen unless, as the mayor put it out, before, unless we start electing, Trump and his cronies out of office. That won't happen unless we actually pass legitimate laws that protect vulnerable people in our vulnerable communities. That is the way that we're going to make this country a much stronger country, and a country in which other countries can follow. And that's pretty much it. So,
Thank you.
As a famous Speaker of the House once said, all politics is local. And while it is important that we exercise our franchise in November, it is equally important that we also address the issues here on the home front. We have a lot of issues that we have to deal with right here in New Jersey amongst us. And so while my attention also is on the national level with respect to who comes into office and who leaves, my primary concern is what we're doing here on the ground in New Jersey, amongst ourselves, because politics is local. Let's be clear, that's where a lot of the decisions and influences that impact the federal level begins at the local level. Okay, and so we have a lot of work to do, and it's we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and get busy with it. But we have to continue to have these conversations amongst ourselves, because we're just beginning to have these conversations amongst ourselves in terms of, quote unquote, the Muslim community, because this crisis has had such impact, okay, nationally, that now we're being forced to have these conversations, and that's good. And so let's continue to have these conversations on even broader platforms. And I want to thank you, Amber, for hosting this event, and that I hope and pray that those who are watching benefit from it. And I myself have benefited from it greatly with these and sharing some thoughts with these wonderful people who are with me.
Yeah, thank you so very much. And, I, from my heart, thank all of you, Ali, in your busy time, and Abdul-Alim, Mayor Khairullah, for giving this time and on this such an important topic. And you're absolutely right. I do have to say the younger generation is our new hope. But I have to say that everybody has to vote, because, I have seen that going in those marches, and even with Vanessa's incident going on, they're so energetic and they're talking about it, yes. And then I asked that you registered to vote, and they said, no, nothing is going to change. So, no, please vote. Because then I said, your voice does not matter. And they look at me that, what are you talking about? I said that, yes, it's not counted. If you want your voice to be counted, you have to be a registered voter. You have to take that right. If people have fought, their lives to get counted, and why would we not take this? So please, my urge to everyone, fill up your senses. The deadline has increased to October 31st for that reason. And please, take your right of, voting. And I thank and all my audience. This is our first episode. We will be having this every Friday, to talk, break barriers, and, have this uncomfortable talk. So I thank everyone to join me, and channel, 52. Thank you again for joining, and Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you.
Thank you.